Welcome to the Institute of Museum and Library Services webinar for American Latino Museum Internship and Fellowship Initiative as part of our fiscal year 2023 information session. My name is Gibran Villalobos, and I'll be hosting this webinar. We're delighted that you are interested in learning more about the American Latino Museum Internship and Fellowship Initiative, which I'll refer to as ALMIFI moving forward. Our goal in this presentation is to provide specific information about the American Latino Museum Internship and Fellowship Initiative and make some recommendations that you may wish to consider when preparing your application. Since this is a pre-recorded webinar and you won't have the opportunity to ask questions, feel free to contact me or other staff in the Office of Museum Services to seek answers to your questions or to discuss a project idea. The staff contact slide is shown later in this webinar. This is one of a series of webinars designed to help you find the information you need and to create a more competitive application for IMLS museum funding. Choosing a funding opportunity for FY 2023 is available as a recording and as a PDF of the slides, along with transcripts, on our website at the link on this slide. The webinar covers the IMLS vision, mission, and strategic plan with an emphasis on how they influence our grant-making process. We also address institutional eligibility, provide a quick overview of all our funding opportunities, discuss how to find more information on our website, provide tips to help you complete an application, and we cover the places with which you must be registered in order to apply for an IMLS grant. There are also individual webinars for each of the museum grant programs. In this presentation, we'll be addressing the following topics: where to find information, ALMIFI overview, eligibility, characteristics of successful ALMIFI projects, important dates, how much and how many, ALMIFI goals, application components, review criteria, application tips, timelines, and context. I also want to make sure to point out where the application process begins, which is on our website. Use the Grants drop-down menu and choose Apply for a Grant. Clicking that will take you to a list of grant programs from which you will choose American Latino Museum Internship and Fellowship Initiative. These guidelines, or our Notice of Funding Opportunity, that we call NOFOs, you can see on the right are downloadable as a PDF. These NOFOs, as we call them, will walk you through the application process and contain most of the information I will provide today. Now for some background. The American Latino History and Culture Grant Program was created by an act of Congress in 2020, the same act that created the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Latino. The legislation that created the museum directed IMLS to create a grant program to improve operations, care of collections, and development of professional management at American Latino museums. The American Latino Museum Internship and Fellowship Initiative sits under the ALHC and is designed to strengthen the institutional capacity in the American Latino Museum community. You can be one of three types of organizations to be eligible to apply to ALMIFI. If you're applying as a museum, you will need to certify that you use a professional staff, be organized on a permanent basis for essentially educational or aesthetic purposes, own or use tangible objects, either animate or inanimate, and care for these objects, and exhibit these objects to the general public on a regular basis at least 120 days a year, and conduct these activities in facilities that you own or operate. Regarding the 120-day rule, during our current COVID-19 reality, you can count that these 120 days in either the year preceding the application due date, the year preceding your first shutdown due to COVID-19, And this might be helpful if your local has had an on and off closures throughout the pandemic. Or you can use the calendar year preceding the current one. So in this case, that would be 2022. You must also be in partnership with an institution of higher education, including Hispanic serving institutions. The lead applicant can be the university or college in partnership with a museum, or vice versa. Either is correct as long as there's a partnership in place. In addition to the general IMLS funding eligibility criteria, the ALMIFI grant program has specific eligibility criteria that is described in the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. To be eligible for an award under the FY 2023 American Latino Museum Internship and Fellowship Initiative, you must qualify as one of the following: a museum whose primary purpose is reflected in its mission is American Latino life, art, history, and/or culture; a not-for-profit museum service organization or association whose primary purpose, as reflected in its mission, is to support American Latino museums; and an institution of higher education, including Hispanic serving institutions. Let's now discuss the purpose of this grant program. ALMIFI will support projects that engage in museum-based internships and fellowship opportunities in partnership with institutions of higher education so that museums can improve services for the American public. ALMIFI is all about meeting the needs of the museum field, our institutions, and our professionals. We invest in these partnerships that expand opportunities in the field and devise plans to move museums forward through the development of resources and tools for use by multiple institutions and/or groups of museum professionals. All requests must be between $100,000 and $750,000, including both direct and indirect costs. If you ask for less than $100,000 or more than $750,000, your application will be rejected and not reviewed. There is no cost share requirement for ALMIFI, though you may include one if your organization will contribute funds towards this particular project. It's important to note that if you decide to include cost share in your application, it must be met by the end of the award. We will hold you to that figure, so keep that in mind when applying. Cost share may be in the form of cash, staff, or volunteer time, or third-party contributions. It may not be funds from another federal source. In terms of how many applications you may submit, there is no limit to the number of applications you can file in response to the FY23 funding announcement for ALMIFI. As you consider the option to submit more than one application, we urge you to think about the capacity of your organization to manage multiple federal awards at once. Now, I want to talk about the two program goals for ALMIFI. Your project must align with one of the two program goals and a set of corresponding objectives. Goal and objective choices should be identified clearly in the narrative. For this, you'll want to look at section D2C as part of the NOFO. Goal 1 is the support of museum-based undergraduate internships. Its objectives correspond to the types of projects ALMIFI supports. An example of this would be developing a new curriculum for museum studies programs with a lens on American Latino life for use by museums across the country. This could correspond to objective 1.1. If there's already an existing internship program that is being expanded in relation to American Latino culture, this could correspond to objective 1.2. Goal number 2 is about the museum-based fellowship to increase museum career opportunities for individuals focused on American Latino culture. The two objectives are parallel to those that we saw in goal number 1. They support the development or scaling up fellowship models for museum professionals on topics that increase their ability to work within museums centering American Latino culture. Projects in goal number 2 would establish or expand advanced professional studies, mentorship, or practical research. Next up are the documents that make up your application and that you will upload into grant.gov. These application components fall into 3 categories. The first is required documents. All applications must include these. The second group is conditionally required documents. Some applications must include these. It might depend on the nature of your institution or some aspect of your project. For example, if you are a nonprofit organization, you must include your proof of nonprofit letter from the IRS. If you are proposing a project that will produce a digital product, you must include a digital product plan. If you meet the condition, omission of any one of these can result in the exclusion of your application from further consideration. The third group of application components are supporting documents. These are completely optional. You may submit some or none. Think about including only those that supplement or back up your narrative. You may refer to these materials in your narrative so your reviewers know where to look. For example, if you are basing your project on successful work you have done in your museum, you may want to indicate that an evaluation report is included as supporting material. This is not the place to introduce new information, and also be respectful of your reviewers' time. In the ALMIFI NOFO, you will find a table of application components. We recommend that you use this as a checklist to keep yourself organized. It is divided into required, conditionally required, and supporting documents. The middle column tells you about document formats, and the third tells you how to name each document. Note that deviating from the naming convention or upload a document that is not a PDF, such as Word or Excel, will result in an error, and the system might think that the document is not present. This table also provides links to instructions and forms. Now, let's talk about the narrative of your proposal. You have 10 pages to cover 3 sections. Project justification. In this section of the narrative, you should lay out the reasoning for your project. Tell us in the clearest terms what need, problem, or challenge you expect to address, how you identified it, or who or what will benefit from your work, and how your project will address the goals of the American Latino Museum Internship and Fellowship Initiative. Note that reviewers have prompts that correspond to these questions. You will find this information in section E1 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. For this section of the narrative, reviewers will consider how well you've defended the need, problem, or challenge that you are seeking to address. How well have you identified who or what will benefit from the project, and how good of a job you've done in involving them in the planning process. Reviewers also value external needs assessment or research that can support and validate your need. They'll look at who particularly will benefit and how the museum field will benefit, and they will weigh in on your demonstrated understanding of current research and practice in that area. Project work plan. The project work plan is the part of the narrative in which you explain what you will do, how you plan to address risks that may be present, who will do the project, when, and using what resources. Consider who will plan, implement, and manage your project, and what time, financial, personnel, and other resources will you need to carry out these activities. The reviewers will be looking for evidence that you know what you are doing, have the right people at the table, that the project is realistic, that there is room to change course if needed. Project results. The final section of your narrative should be devoted to articulating your project's intended results. What specific results do you intend to achieve in your project, and what will change as a result? Tell us how you will sustain the benefits of your project beyond the lifespan of this particular project. So in other words, when the federal funding goes away, how will the benefit to the field be sustained? Reviewers will register their thoughts about how likely it is that you will deliver on the results that you've proposed, how useful, and whether your plan for sustaining the benefits of the project are reasonable and practical. When preparing your proposal, be careful to include only allowable costs in both your IMLS request and your cost share. To do otherwise can hurt your chances of getting positive reviews and being recommended for funding. We'll go through some common expenses that are allowable and unallowable, but for details, please see 2 CFR 200. This is the part of the Code of the Federal Regulations covering uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards. Fortunately, the regulations are available online in a searchable format on the U.S. Government Publishing Office website, and a link is listed on the slide. Of particular interest is Subpart E, Cost Principles. So, allowable costs. In the ALMIFI Notice of Funding Opportunity, we provide a partial list of the most common examples of allowable costs for this grant program. These include personnel salaries, wages and fringe benefits, travel expenses for key project staff and consultants, materials, supplies, software and equipment related directly to project activities, third-party costs, for example, program evaluation or software development. You can also include honoraria, stipends, and other compensation from project participants, for example, community members or advisors, staff and volunteer training, paid internships or fellowships, indirect or overhead costs. So these costs may be part of what you ask IMLS to pay for and or what you will pay for as part of your cost share if one should be included. Now, the unallowable costs include general fundraising costs, such as development office staff or other staff time devoted to general fundraising, contributions to endowments, general operating support. These costs are part of what we support through your indirect costs, acquisition of collections, general advertising or public relation costs designed solely for promotional activities other than those related to the specific project, construction or renovation of facilities, and fabrication and other types of work can be allowable. Check with us if you have any questions regarding this. Social activities, ceremonies, receptions, or entertainment. Note that sometimes food can be allowable. For example, when you need to feed kids or teens during a working lunch at a training workshop, and research projects. So these costs may not be part of what you ask IMLS to pay for, nor can they be part of what you will pay for as part of your cost share, if one is included. In fact, unallowable expenses can't show up anywhere in your proposal. Something to keep in mind. I want to provide some application tips. First on the list is to register early. You must have an active SAM.gov registration and know your unique entity identifier, your UEI, which is generated through your SAM account. You must also have a current and functional grants.gov registration. Check to see whether your grants.gov registration is associated with a former staff member whose password might be a mystery to you. And of course, leave time to deal with these eventualities. They are bound to happen. It's also crucial to remember that your SAM.gov registration expires each year and you must renew it. This can sometimes take about 2 or 3 weeks, so be sure to check in on SAM.gov and find out your status at login.gov. Some other important things to know. Read the application guidelines, the NOFOs. We know it's a long document, but it contains essential information on how to prepare your application components. Schedule a counseling call with one of our staff. We're available to answer your questions, and these often come as part of the process, general questions. And later, you may have a very specific or detailed question about a particular component. You can email us or call us with your questions. Describe your museum well and vividly, and use recent, relevant data to make your point. Reviewers will look at the application to try to understand your museum. Be sure to give them a good description. Follow the narrative outline in the NOFO, and consider using the same headings to make it easy for reviewers to read your application. Avoid acronyms and jargon. The people who will review your application are experts, but they may not be totally familiar with your shorthand. Make it easy for them to understand what you mean. Ask a colleague to read the narrative with fresh eyes. Ask them to act like a reviewer who's seeing this for the very first time. Do this well in advance of the submission deadline so you have adequate time to edit the narrative if necessary. Be sure your application is complete. Check it against a table of application components to be sure you're not missing any required components. Then submit to grants.gov early so you have time to correct any errors before the deadline. Other important things to know. Applications are due on grants.gov on August 7, 2023. The awards will be announced in late September, and we look to seeing the projects begin on September 27, 2023. Thank you very much for your interest in IMLS and in the American Latino Museum Internship and Fellowship Initiative. We hope you have found this information in this webinar helpful. Here's a listing of the names, email addresses, and direct phone numbers for program staff in the Office of Museum Services. There is also a list of staff on our website with contact information. We encourage you to contact us with any questions that you might have. We'll be sure to respond. And always, we're happy to help. And remember that our website is the central place for information about applying for IMLS grants. Thanks.